Good afternoon, world. It is July 27th, 2022 at 11 a.m. And I guess the scuttlebutt or the news on a national level that seems to be garnishing a whole lot of attention is, of course, none other than the Department of Justice revealing, quite frankly, through a kind of a PR initiative through Lester Holt at NBC News, and then how it transitioned through all major media, particularly the New York Times and the Washington Post, is the revelation that the DOJ is criminally investigating a former president. And one of the pressing questions to Merrick Garland was, well, are you concerned of consequences that could further polarize the United States that lead to unintended consequences? Was the inference. And, of course, the DOJ, thankfully, because this isn't obviously known by a journalist, a so-called journalist at a mainstream media operation, let alone the general public, but it's not the job of the AG of the United States to concern himself with political consequences to inaction on a massive criminal activity. And so there's about 4 or 5 different obvious scenarios that Donald Trump and his reaction, his coordination, his impetus, his intent, everything that took place in and around the January 6th hearings, show just incredible conspiracy to literally defraud and steal the election, defraud the United States and steal the election. And is literally huge as that all feels or seems to be, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we know Trump is guilty of, including tax evasion and control fraud and all sorts of different maneuverings of real estate deceptive acts and practices and money laundering and things that are literally off the charts that leads to the ongoing, at least during the impeachment side of things. I think it's probably cooled off since then, at least the questioning, but whatever involvement Trump had with Putin going back decades, particularly involved with Trump's, companies and obviously Putin and the oligarchs of Russia laundering money out of Russia into the United States into real estate, which of course is a never-ending scenario. It's overtaken the city of London, which I've mentioned before, based on some media investigations from 60 Minutes, among others. And how this whole operation works has been going on for years, but it just continues to go on. Why? Because it greases the palms of the accountants, of the lobbyists, of the white shoe law firms, all of really the professional mechanisms that fit within that sort of scenario. So, it appeared to me over the course of a long time. I mean, the big befuddlement is, why wouldn't the Department of Justice go all in on, all of Trump's indiscretions? Not indiscretions, his criminality. And the answer I kept resolving in my mind was that he either had information on somebody or was acting as an informant to the FBI or something even, further behind the scenes that would make a lot of sense if I didn't know what game was being played. But just given the nuts and bolts of the way the law is, I mean, we've seen for years endless evidence of Donald Trump's criminality. And so you can only arrive at one conclusion, one of 2 conclusions. One is DOJ didn't want to, potentially prosecute a former or a sitting president, which apparently they couldn't. And I'm a little bit murky on the law on that, even though I think the entire presidency of Donald Trump was that question. But also in the aftermath, a political decision and calculus of whether or not, like in the case of Watergate, Ford pardoned Nixon, and the idea was to move forward, and it basically ended any political furtherment of then President Ford. But in the end, the calculation was to try to get the nation to move forward out of a very difficult time, and it really never salvaged anything. The question was whether or not DOJ was doing that now. But according to Merrick Garland in his interview and what everybody is saying out there in the ecosphere, in reacting to all of this stuff, is that DOJ is pressing forward, even if Trump decides or announces he's running for president again. So all that being equal, the Department of Justice is seemingly doing its job, right? But all of the questions that are fermenting as a result of this scenario are all about just the basics. It's like it's so obvious to me, and to anybody who has any degree of knowledge of what's legal and what's not, realizes that why is the DOJ moving at such a snail's pace? And more importantly, why is it a question, really, and why does it need to be drawn out so much? I mean, it seems like this should have already been done. But I'm telling you that everything that is going on now that maybe seems overwhelming, huge, beyond the scope of your understanding, beyond the pale, because there's so much involvement, there's so many questions, there's so many, kind of confusing scenarios because of the cloudiness that surrounds this, because of the nature of media. First of all, everything involving Trump is like literally child's play. It seems like both the Department of Justice as well as the DA of Manhattan and the AG of New York and what's happening down in Georgia could have fragged Trump a long time ago, given what's obvious, given what's already been presented, given the questions, quite frankly, that aren't being asked. It seems to me like the most important questions are, okay, well, who were really the masterminds behind all of this? Because I'm convinced Trump was just reacting and doing what Trump does, and that was the whole reason for Trump to begin with, versus what the Coke machine does, versus what the Mercers were involved with, which obviously people like Eric Prince, the dark master of the dark arts with Blackwater, and other billionaires that were involved with this whole thing that would lead to the resources playing out into what fermented not only January 6th, but the execution of it, right? So that's one bucket. But it's tiny in comparison to what has existed non-stop since at least 2009. Why do you want to listen to me? I am the only person that exists that seemingly can illustrate, orchestrate, reveal, provide the detailed evidence from the highest sources, the most important sources of a crime that has a lot of connectivity, quite frankly, to the things that are being asked of Donald Trump right now, but in magnitudes that are beyond comprehension, larger, exponentially larger than what the entire January 6th scenario is all about. So the first place I want to start, and I'm going to try to keep this super tight because obviously I've talked now more than I wanted to for this, but because I keep thinking about, okay, well, we're doing an execution for TikTok, which are going to be like 3-minute increments that reveal some aspect that we're trying to draw a lot of attention into the fold. And then, of course, there's the other aspect of it, which are in its entirety on Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs, the Con on YouTube, where these are basically lectures to try to get you to understand what it is that I'm telling you that are related to the con. That is the only story that matters. It is the hub, it's the spoke, it's the wheel, it's everything that constitutes what our system has become. And so in the con, for example, I think the first question that I have to resolve is that what is capitalism? Okay? What is capitalism in context of what is democracy? And then ultimately, what is the rule of law? I think most of us who don't have, a higher degree in any one of those particular disciplines, are just people trying to navigate through life on a daily basis to provide for our families, to live within their means, to live within the rule of the law so that they don't get in trouble, so that they can provide stability to their families, to hopefully provide some value to where you can support in a reasonable way that hopefully your life meant something, right? And so we all have to look outward to the society that we live in, and we have to have these sort of fundamental grasp of just the basics. You don't break the law. And if you do and you get caught and you cheat and you take shortcuts and you hurt people or whatever, there's going to be some sort of consequence for that. Okay, so that's one side of the house. That's called the law, okay? And that's how we're supposed to function within society. Then there's capitalism. Well, everybody has got to make money in this society because nothing is free, right? Now, obviously, there's ways you can go to places where there are shortcuts and there are types of ways you can get through life where some things are offered to you at no cost if you fit into a certain category. And I'm not going to argue all of those elements, but money in its own right is what affords you the ability to not actually have to be completely independent, right? Because if money didn't matter, you'd have to build your own house, you'd have to provide your own transportation, you'd have to provide your own clothing, you'd have to provide your own energy, right? How many of us could actually do that? Well, you'd have to be incredibly motivated, incredibly activated, and it'd be a very difficult life. How many are capable of living out in the middle of nowhere where you're able to accomplish everything that provides the sustainability of life? Well, not many of us, and quite frankly, not many of us want to do that in in 2022 because of just the nature of our lives. Everything is really relatively easy, is it not? You have your cell phones that can give you every answer to every question that exists, get you anywhere, where do you want to go, transact, all of these types of things within technology. We can fly all over the world. It's a beautiful time to be alive, and it's magnificent. And what enables us to buy all of those things that we need for our survival? Well, money, right? I.e. capital. But we have to make money to be able to create whatever it is that our lives enable us to do. You want to go see movies, you want to go out to dinner, you want to go travel, you want to go see the show, whatever the case it is, all of that stuff requires money. So you work, you find ways to make money. Do you do it legally? Do you do it illegally? If you take shortcuts, you get caught cheating, lying. There's the moral aspect of it. There's the ethical aspect of it where you might not be able to remain employed anymore. But there's also the criminal aspect of it. If you get caught, you do the time. Don't do the crime without doing the time. We all understand that. We all understand that time is money. Money is value. What we want, we get. And the idea in the United States is that capitalism provides a free market economy that we can all find our way to get where we want if only we're able to get there. If only we're capable, I guess is the sort of motif, right? So we all know the difference then is if something is set up. I mean, we all love sports in the United States. We all love watching football. Most of us love watching football, baseball, basketball, whatever the case is. But, have you ever been to a sports bar and you see an umpire or a ref make a bad call and everybody goes into hysterics? Why? Well, because we want the game to be fair and we want the outcome to be right. And so that's why we, for example, in football created, instant replay, because the refs got it wrong in so many important situations that we decided to rectify that. So now the refs get it more, at a higher percentage than they did before without instant replay. And that was a win-win for the United States public. So it's kind of a cultural motif that we in the United States expect fairness. We want to compete, we want to win, but we want to play on an even keel playing field. We all understand when the deck's stacked and somebody's not playing under fair rules, and if they use that to hurt us, then we want them to go down. We're either going to take revenge ourselves a lot of the times. I mean, that's pretty much the motif of most movies, or somehow somebody some way is going to find justice. Okay, so that's another aspect of the legal question. But the capital question is, okay, well, you make money, you have revenue, you manage your business accordingly, and you probably all try to teach this to your children, where it's like you got to manage your household debt. Debt's a great thing. Debt and finance are something that make our lives better, especially if we know how to use debt in our favor, and we can leverage debt. It's an amazing way to get cars and get education, buy houses and everything else. And if you do it all correctly, and you are somebody who actually has proven, i.e. credit rating, that you're able to, maintain a certain level of credit, then you can maintain a certain level of debt because you've got income. And, there are people that, take risks, monumentally so, right? So what Donald Trump has done with his real estate empire from the very beginning of time, slightly different than the average household, right? So if you go to your local Best Buy and you're with your wife and you guys are kind of debating strongly whether or not you want to get a certain TV, and you're kind of thinking about, well, how much money is in your monthly budget, and you'd really like this new TV that's on sale. Your son's going berserk about, wanting you to get it because he can play his, late, and he'll probably want some sort of game apparatus that, connects to it. And all of those things are real world questions, right? And so everybody's supposedly supposed to live within their means. If they get out in front of their debt, it becomes a problem, especially if somehow, some way, suddenly that person's revenue is cut short. They lose their job. They're downsized. Some sort of factor that's bigger than them, suddenly pulls the rug out from underneath their ability to maintain everything that they've got to maintain to sustain, a family, right? In a responsible way. So that's the capital side of it. But the question has always remained, and I bring this up a lot in the truth bombs: what's more important, revenue or borrowing? Well, in that particular case, it's revenue, because you've got to have revenue to sustain borrowing. and you're supposed to manage it correctly. And if you don't, we have a brilliant get out of jail free card, which is called bankruptcy. Now, you pay a heavy price for bankruptcy, there's no question, but it's also kind of a beautiful idea within the notion of capitalism that if you're a business and you have to do all of those things that we just talked about managing household, which is exponentially more involved, then, you get out of your skis, there's a downturn in the economy, you haven't managed things as well as you might have. You might not have, basically created a rainy day fund or some sort of buffer to be able to handle the downturns. And suddenly you find yourself in debt up to your eyeballs and you can't maintain that debt service anymore. So you've got to, you got to pull the axe, right? You got to do bankruptcy. That saves your life, in some ways, but it also puts you in a major bind if you rely on credit and you got to start over. So it takes most people, if they do Chapter 13, Chapter 11, 7 years to get out of bankruptcy, and then hopefully you can build your credit back in and get in the game again. So capital comes from somewhere, does it not? In the United States, which is predicated, at least the last 40 years of my lifetime, debt. It's a debt-based currency. And the Federal Reserve is able to maintain monetary policy the amount of currency actually that exists out there through a number of different ways. It's called the M1 and M2 money supply, right? But the United States is not a household. The United States can actually create, per the Constitution and the way Congress is designed, is that it can actually reach within its own resources, which is the Federal Reserve, and through the Treasury to provide budget for really anything that it needs to provide budget for, whether it's war, whether it's emergencies, a number of things. The government never runs out of money. We're a sovereign currency, the dollar, that has over 240 some odd years of global evolution that included world wars and all of these incredible sacrifices of treasure and blood to be able to achieve what it has, which is one of the global superpowers with unbelievable amounts of resources. So when people start to conflate, for example, that the United States can print money out of thin air, that's not exactly true. They can. They digitize it in thin air, but it's predicated on the value of its productive capacity, its resources, its military, its energy, its everything within the context of the global scenario. And we're at the apex. We're one of the major superpowers, if not the only superpower, really. And we actually have global hegemony over our currency, the dollar. So, yes, the United States government, through the Federal Reserve, which a lot of people misinterpret as independent of the rest of government, it's not. It's under the purview of Congress, but Congress has given it incredible independence, given what it is that I'm trying to tell you. And so they can create money out of thin air for whatever the government needs to be able to maintain whatever the priorities of the United States government are, and that's how we fund it. And it's the full faith and credit of the United States. So I started off with this sort of dissertation and this awareness of what's going on right now with the legalities and what Department of Justice is doing with Donald Trump, given the January 7th insurrection, but all the other questions and considerations that Donald Trump has been up to his eyeballs in forever, to make the point that as big as that is, it's tiny in comparison to what we reveal at the con, www.thecon.tv. And ultimately, what is the most important reveal of them all, and I'm the only one who's going to bring this to you. And I bring it to you day in and day out in as many ways as possible to hopefully ferment and get a hold of some people's minds out there so that you guys basically become activists or speak the gospel or whatever you want. But it's a giant grift. It's a giant thievery corporation because of what we've shown you in the con. So since 2009, the Federal Reserve has pumped in 2009 $29 trillion to basically backstop the global economy, to create liquidity again, to get banks functioning again, because they all were basically bankrupt, kaput, done. They bet the house on the housing market. They created derivatives trades, all sorts of stuff that we show you on the con, all predicated on fraud. And what is fraud? Is fraud shenanigans? No. Fraud is theft by deception. Every aspect of the housing pipeline was predicated on one version or another of deception that led to a ginormous global meltdown that would require $29 trillion to basically create some sort of ability for the United States to grow out of this. And we were in the recession for, I don't know, 10 years roughly before we started seeing, the Federal Reserve policies start to hit the broader country. And that really didn't kick in until, crazily enough, until about 2016, 2019, and then we had COVID. But then that's the next phase of what took place in the Federal Reserve, which led to another $20 trillion in 2019, and there's been another at least 10 trillion with the CARES Act and so forth. But that was all money digitized into existence to go into a formula that put the entire full faith and credit of the United States to backstop a criminal enterprise. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. We have laws to break this up, and all of the laws that are involved with the con that we show top to bottom, including the top whistleblowers, the top folks from the FBI, the DOJ, and the SEC, all of it is on display, and it's monumentally bigger than the January 6th hearings. It's infinitely bigger than what Donald Trump is guilty of. Now, here's the thing. Donald Trump is guilty. I'm not saying, look, they're going after the wrong guy. I'm not saying that at all. Donald Trump is just a consequence of all of the madness that has hijacked the government's ability to do its job for the people. It's doing its job for a criminal syndicate, which is our financial system. And our financial system, colluded with our fossil fuel system, has created this ginormous global power matrix that ultimately controls the whole show, of which Donald Trump is a small player and got involved because he wanted his piece. Now, he's big compared to somebody like myself, but in terms of what he did, he's literally tiny compared to the titans of Wall Street and global finance and all of the others that got and played with it. And so going back to the notion of capital, right? So capitalism, just the very definition of it, invokes risk reward. The whole purpose of capitalism is investors who know what they're doing find business opportunities to put capital into, to grow business, to have return. There's risk reward. There's incredible discipline and incredible knowledge that has to go, hand in hand with that investment strategy to become successful. Now, where does politics come involved, and democracy and all the rest of it? Well, the notion of democracy, guys, is demos, of the many, the people, right? So that we don't have oligarchy, which are just control of the few, or a monarchy or an aristocracy controlled by one, or a dictatorship controlled by one, that sort of thing, right? So democracy, the idea is that you, we, me, the people, have to be informed to understand what's in our best interest, to hopefully vote for representatives that are going to elevate our interests so that the government works for our best interests. So the question that you have to ask yourself is the government acting in accordance with the laws? Is the government acting in accordance with the health and vibrancy of the American people? Of course not. All of you maintain, I think, for decades now, we all know the system is corrupt. We all know the system is rigged, but nobody knows who did what, when, and how they did it. So when you have a couple of backdoor scenarios that have popped into existence since we enlisted Citizens United because the Supreme Court basically legalized corruption, there's all sorts of backdoors of dark money ways to be able to find people that are very sophisticated to get into positions of power, to be able to do the bidding of the industries that put them there in the first place. So one of the top dogs in this whole apparatus are the Koch brothers. And the Koch brothers, of course, Charles Koch is dead, but they have for decades, and their organization is just as strong and thriving as ever. They've had an outcome. They want to be able to create a sort of an shall we say, a propagandist approach to free markets and this sort of Midwest, ethos of too much government in my pockets destroys my ability to thrive. Meanwhile, they put everybody in government to make sure government does its bidding for its interest, which is the fossil fuel company, of which is tied to all the financialization aspects of this, of which that gets tied into the Federal Reserve and everything else that I'm laying out for you. Which in the end, it's called corruption. Now, in the case of the January 6th insurrection, the Koch brothers are all over it. Okay, the Koch institutions are all over it. So were all the other billionaires I'm talking about. And the January 6th investigation, the DOJ investigation, isn't actually going there. They're just going after Trump and his pomposity, his stupidity, his being a complete buffoon, and predictable one at that, which is my theory that he was actually kind of maneuvered into position to be that guy as a fall guy because of what I'm trying to tell you. So the reason we say the government is corrupt is that dark money forces can use this whole system to basically play everybody against each other, but at the same time, there is no risk for them because the Federal Reserve's financial policy serves their interests. It's like climate, but it's climate for this dastardly motherfucker behind the scenes that's pulling all the strings and has complete control of the levers of power. So there's that. And I think we've all seen the movie, and we all know a good guy and a bad guy when we see it all played out, but it's hard for us to keep all of this into context when we see this stuff playing out day after day because we're overwhelmed by too much information or misinformation, or somehow we hang out with somebody that thinks this way, and so we want to be a part of that group, so therefore we're going to kind of take on the characteristics of whatever that group are. It seems like it's complicated, but it's not. These are just different pieces of the puzzle that make the system the way it is. And what I'm trying to get to in this whole corollary, this whole objective, is to try to get your head around the fact that the full faith and the credit of the United States through the Federal Reserve has spent trillions of dollars backstopping criminal behavior that has overrun Congress, that has overrun the judiciary, so we don't live in the United States. It's the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that's never ended. I'm not Alex Jones. This isn't hyperbole. We've got all of the evidence in the con. I've got more on my shelf. I'm trying desperately to get people to understand this. And I keep thinking to myself, what happens if I got, thought leaders out there to finally put this stuff together? I mean, most of us in this country really believe that, look, there's a chance for us to get to where we want to go. If we work hard enough, if we do the right things, if we play by the rules, and we play within the system, we're going to be rewarded by our own efforts. No, you're not. I'm speaking from experience. I have the truth that literally tens of millions of people were destroyed by, and they still haven't gotten to it. And yet everybody all day, every day, just consumes lies. They consume deception. They'll pay money for it. They'll contribute to campaigns and liars. They'll actually buy the products and services that are destroying them. They'll enable or watch, media or subscribe to media that is dancing on their heads, pissing on their heads, telling them it's rain. I'm not. My team and I are the only ones that are willing to tell you the entire story. We've got it. You just have to wrap your head around it. And once you do, and if millions upon millions of us do, we can end this system and create a renaissance. And we have to, because everything's on the line. The rule of law, democracy, the nature of free markets, and the future are all riding on us getting it right. You got to start with the con. That's how you get there. Onwards and upwards.